All right, welcome. Let's do a first look at Photoshop masks and adjustments. This will be sort of introduction to these two very powerful features in Photoshop. Masks being a way where we can show or hide things that are on in our content layer, and adjustments being a way where we can modify the tonality of some aspect of some tonal space within our content layer. For this demonstration, I'll be showing both as they relate to this layers control window. Okay, so let's start with masks. A mask is simply a way to add on some display logic to your layer. Any layer can have a mask. Every layer starts out not having a mask, or by default showing everything that's on the layer. To create a mask, you can go down to the bottom of your layers control window and find this icon that looks like a circle and a square in a rectangle. It is the add layer mask icon. If you click that, a second thumbnail shows up in your layer. So this is, let's take a look at this layer here. It's got the visibility toggle, this little eyeball. It's got this first thumbnail, which shows the image content on this layer. And then it's got this white thumbnail, which is the layer mask thumbnail. So the fact that the second thumbnail is here tells you that there is a layer mask that that has been enabled on this layer. And then of course there's this layer title. If this thumbnail doesn't exist, if you only have one thumbnail, here's let's just get another layer going. In this layer, there's only one thumbnail. That means it's just content. There's just content on this layer. There's no mask on this layer. Okay, so here's my layer mask. Here's my my content for the layer. I can click on either thumbnail to toggle from one space to the other on this layer. So there's the content of the layer space and there's the mask of the layer space. You'll see that there's a little frame, these corners that show up around the selected layer space. So if I click on my image in the thumbnail, the frame lines show up around this thumbnail, and it tells me I'm going to do something in the content of this layer. So for instance, if I draw some blue in here, it shows up in my content. I've just painted blue on this scene. Okay, if I go over here, click on my thumbnail for the layer mask, and and do something in the layer mask, I've now done it in the mask component of the layer space. So if you take a look here at these two brush strokes, you really get to see what the difference is. There are two different spaces in this layer now. One is for the mask and one is for the content. And the way the mask works is that you get to put in to this layer mask area any combination of tone that ranges from black to white. So this includes gray and every shade of gray in between black and white. The way the layer mask works is that it looks at the shades of gray that you're putting into the mask, and anything that you put in that's white or close to white gets to show up, gets to gets to reveal, and anything that's black or close to black gets to be hidden or gets to be masked, and that's where the term mask comes from. So here my brush is set to black, and you see I made this big squiggle down the middle of my mask. That's why it has erased, as it appears, the content. So if I went and created another layer and put it underneath my flower picture and Let's just get a different color and drop it in. Now we can see what is the result of doing mask work. Here in this image of the flower, I've masked out a big chunk of the middle of the flower, and therefore it's not going to show up. It's not going to be part of the viewable result of this work, and therefore it's like it's a hole. This flower image presents a zigzag hole, and underneath that, whatever's underneath that is going to show through. So my maroon color layer at the very bottom of this layer stack now shows through. That's essentially the logic of the mask. The great thing about a layer mask is that you can edit it. Everything, all the settings here are temporal, so I can undo all this. Like I can get rid of this big swiggle. I can select all and just delete. Or actually I deleted and now it's gray. So you can see the effect of this. This wasn't what I was intending to do, but it's a fine definition. You'll see that it's gray in the thumbnail, and therefore it's made this image partially visible. Technically, it's made it partially masked, partially hidden by a factor of whatever this gray is. And therefore, that's why this red tone is showing up everywhere. If I want to see what my mask work looks like, let's go ahead and get the brush, put a little bit right here. If I want to see what my mask work looks like, I can take my mouse and hold down Option key on the keyboard and then click with my mouse on the layer mask thumbnail, and it will show me the actual data on the layer mask. So it shows me my black brush blob right here, and it shows me this field of gray. So I could actually just sit here and work directly in the mask without looking at the image, but sometimes it's useful to look at the image. So I can re-engage the composite of the image and the mask simply by holding on the Option key and then clicking on the thumbnail. It's a toggle, this selective visibility function. So here we go. I'm going to delete this layer mask. Simply right click on it, get rid of it. I'm going to go backwards in history. I'm just Command Zing my way through here to get to that there. Okay, so I can use any shade of gray for this layer mask. So I could, for instance, as an example, if I wanted to diminish these flowers over here, I can get my quick selection tool, go into the content layer and select them, select these little bits, then click into my mask area, make sure my brush is set to black, and then brush into these areas. I have now masked them out. I've done more than retouch the photo. I've just masked them out. They're actually, if I disable the mask, I can right click on this and disable the layer mask. The content is still there. I've just elected to make them not appear with a mask. I can go to this layer here and use, maybe I'll use, yeah, why not? Spot healing brush tool. And I'll just use this layer as my retouch layer. And I have figured out a way to clean up the edge of this photo in a non-destructive manner. I could completely bring it all back by toggling the visibility of my work. Okay, so these are the very basics of the layer mask. There are many ways that we can apply it. Let's go ahead and let's go ahead and talk about adjustment layers as a way to, one, expand the discussion, and then this gives us a way to bring it back to layer masks. What happened to my cursor? There it is. Okay, so adjustment layers are the other type of image manipulation function in Photoshop. In particular, we use them here in layers. They are accessible here through image. You can go to the main menu, image, adjustments, and you see all of these different things you can do. These type of tonal spaces are very powerful. So for instance, if I wanted to increase the saturation of my selection, right now I'm selecting my layers selected on this flower, I could choose this hue saturation adjustment, and then just slider my way into something that I prefer. Now if I do this here, I'm doing an adjustment. It's performing this tonal change onto the layer. It's actually changing all my information. Okay, if I click this button, all this information has been changed and I can't go back. If I keep on working on this image, I can't go back to the original. So this method here from image adjustments is considered a destructive method. So I'm going to back out of this. It turns out that everything that's accessible here, image adjustments, brightness, see all these different groups, we can apply as an adjustment layer. So the adjustment layers are located down here inside our layers control window through this icon that's a circle / half black, half white. And if I click this, you'll see the same groups of tonal spaces that are available to me. So first off, with adjustments, you can access it through this path. This would be a destructive path, or you could access it through this path, and this is a non-destructive path. Here, if I choose hue saturation, look what happens. Instead of a dialog box showing up, popping up in the middle of my Photoshop work area, I get this properties panel that shows up. It's the same thing. It looks the same as what appeared over here. But all of this stuff here in this properties control area apply to this new adjustment layer that has been added to my layer stack, right? This is the hue saturation adjustment layer. So when we talk about adjustment layers as initiated through this icon, it's going to create a new layer in our layer stack where we can define some settings and then have it exist as a layer. Now, what's great about this is that as a layer, we can toggle the visibility. We can go in and edit it and change it so it is non-destructive. It doesn't affect any of the other layers in a permanent way. It only affects the way, the way the image data is viewed in finality, and it affects whole stacks and stacks of layers. So if I had 10 layers down here underneath and I apply hue saturation, it's going to affect all of them. So let's go ahead and make my adjustment. Excuse me. You can see you have the same kind of control as from image adjustments, but it is editable. So I've just made this change here. I don't need to push any buttons to commit. It's just held it onto this hue saturation layer. The other thing I can do that's an added bonus when I'm using an adjustment layer is I can initiate a blend mode. Oh man, my cursor's acting up. All sorts of issues. Okay, so it gives you more tools to have a finessed adjustment. So that's the example of hue saturation. Now you'll see on this hue saturation layer, there's the layer mask thumbnail. Well, what this means is I can now not only apply an adjustment that will give me a non-destructive modification to this image, but I can also use a mask to control where this adjustment gets to show up and where it doesn't. So as an example, I will set a brush. I'll just set it to black, but I will bring back the opacity so it's not putting down full black, and I'll bring back the flow so I'm truly could be, you know, maybe painting, and I'll just start brushing, hide into the background here, and you'll see it takes some of that saturation away from the background, but it leaves it here in the foreground. So if we look at the adjustment layer work, doesn't look great here because I'm using a mouse and not a pen or something like that, but you'll see that essentially I am denying this saturation that's being applied from this hue saturation adjustment layer to show up fully in the sky here. Another thing I could do, for instance, let me just set this background to white and delete my work. Whoops, sorry. There, delete my work. There's a number of ways that I can put down the layer mask on any layer, not just an adjustment layer. For instance, let's go here and use this gradient tool. I will put a gradient like this. Now let's change it. With this gradient. This gives me a very smooth application of the black to white tonal range. So that means it's going to hide the effect from the top, but reveal the effect on the bottom. So here's what that looks like. Here's the original, and here's the adjustment layer applied with a gradient. Okay, so that means the saturation increase that's happening on this hue saturation layer of plus 18, factor plus 18, is being applied fully down here and not up here. Okay, so this is how we can create very, very sophisticated adjustments. Let's see, what else can we do here as a basic demonstration? There's another way to access adjustments. If I click in this properties control window, there's a tab here for adjustments. There are icons. So if you prefer like an icon method, you could do that. Let's try one here. They're the same as, you know, this list here. They're just, instead of a text list, it's icons. Let's do a contrast adjustment layer. Here's my contrast adjustment. Let's increase the brightness and increase the contrast. But we're just going to, let's say we're just going to have it apply to these foreground flowers. Here's how I could do that. I'll select on my image, get my quick select tool. I'm using the quick select not necessarily because it's the best tool, but it's the fastest for demos. You know, it's good because it just does everything really fast. And if I don't need to be 100% perfect, we just get the idea. It's good for that. So, and that's it. I'm not trying to diss the tool either. It's a great tool, but sometimes we want more precision. But here, you know, look at this. I'm in the neighborhood. Okay, so I've selected this flower. Now what I can do is I can invert this. So I'm now selecting everything but the flower. I can click on the mask, the layer mask of the brightness contrast. Make sure my brush is set to black. Opacity is fine. Well, let's use the bucket. Paint bucket. I'm gonna just drop my paint bucket on, and I have masked everything but those foreground flowers. So that means the brightness and contrast that's being applied on this adjustment layer is only coming through on the flowers. So that means they should pop a little bit more than everything else. And if we toggle to compare, yeah, there's quite a difference, right? And if it's too much, if this is too much, this selective kind of adjustment, I can dial it back. So I can, get a blend going. Maybe I'll overlay this. Okay, let's take a look. Okay, so that would be an example of using an adjustment layer with a layer mask that has a selection keyed on some actual content. Anyway, this is, well, let's see, one more thing. I do want to show how to do a clipping mask. I don't have enough elements here. I should have a couple different image elements for it to be very relevant, but I just want to show, because I mentioned it in this week's introduction, that you can force an adjustment layer to affect only one layer. Actually, I can do it here. Let's see. Here is what's going on here. Okay, so here is a layer. This is my retouch layer. Yeah, I see what's going on. And now that I've applied these adjustments, they don't look as great. I need to do this. All right. Now it looks better. Let me think. I know what I'll do. I'm going to take this flower group here. Let's choose this tool. I'm going to take this flower group, copy it, and then paste it so that I have another flower group here, and I'm going to place them, turn it around, place it here, maybe place it right there, nope, right there, and let's get a blend mode going. Yeah, we'll do this. Now what I'm going to do here is get a mask, set my brush to hide, and I'm going to use my brush to take the heat off of all these edges on the composite. Okay, to the point where I can successfully argue that maybe I'll even use my smudge tool and smudge some of these. I'm basically smudging these edges around the content. All right, so I've added some more flowers here, right? Here's this before, and now here's this, and I'll bet that on first view, nobody will notice. Anybody who looks at this image, they won't notice that I've added some flowers into this area. What I could do now is I can add an adjustment layer. Let's see what might be good. Let's color it. I don't know if that'll be good. And let's make it a little bit, let's change the color to, you know, there's a lot of sunset golden thing happening here. And I will soft light it. I mean, that looks kind of nice, but I only want it to apply to this area with a new flower. So what I'm going to do here is I can hold down my Option key, and then you see when I move my mouse in between this adjustment layer and the layer right beneath, the icon changes from the pointer, hand pointer, to this little arrow. That is called a clipping mask. And that is saying, if I click this, it's saying this adjustment layer here only applies to the layer below it. And it's indicated by this little arrow. You can also do it from, if I right click on the layer and go to the menu, I can control it from this area here. Let's release. Release makes it go away. And then if I right click, I can create clipping mask. So what I've done here is I've created this color fill, this gold color fill, but now it only applies to this little work that I did over here. I don't know if that's the best example of like why you would do this, but this is a functional example. You get to see, you know, how I initiated this clipping mask, either from right clicking from the menu or from the keyboard. If it's not good enough, I'm sorry. We will demonstrate the use of the clipping mask in more detail as the course goes on, but I just wanted to include it in this video for anybody who's wondering. Okay, so that is the first look at masks and adjustments. And there is mostly exercises this week, but there will be one creative project where you get to imagine and apply what you've learned this week with with masks and adjustments. So I look forward to seeing what you guys come up with. All right.